There's an old belief that animals can sense things humans cannot. They detect the unseen, the unspoken, the things lurking beneath the surface of reality. But what happens when a warning goes unheeded? What if the only ones who truly understand a looming threat have no voice to explain it? This is the eerie tale of Olanfemi Street, a once thriving community that began to change in ways no one could comprehend except for a few vigilant eyes and, more ominously, the relentless barking of dogs who sensed a truth too terrifying to acknowledge. A tight-knit community. Olanfemi Street in Lagos was more than just a neighborhood. It was a family. Everyone knew each other and life moved with a familiar rhythm. The aroma of sizzling plantains, the laughter of children playing after school, and the distant sounds of market vendors created a vibrant and comforting atmosphere. People greeted one another warmly, and even minor disputes were settled with understanding and compromise. But that was before the arrival of the Umla joint that changed everything. Baba Ari, an elderly resident, was the neighborhood's unofficial watchman. He had lived on Olanfemi Street longer than most and had a sharp eye for detail. Nothing escaped his notice, especially not the strange occurrences that started unfolding after Mama Yabo and her family set up their new food stall. Chidinma, a young woman who helped her mother run a provision store, was known for her warm spirit and chatter. She was beloved by everyone and had an intuition sharper than most. It was she who first mentioned feeling uneasy about the new Umla sellers, but no one thought much of it at the time. When Mama Yabo and her family moved in, they were welcomed with open arms. They were friendly, engaging, and their food was irresistible. The joint quickly became the go-to spot for residents and outsiders alike. It seemed like a blessing to the community, until things began to change. The first signs of something strange. Mr. Benson, a retired banker, owned two large dogs, Rex and Bruno. They were known to be well-trained, gentle, and affectionate towards the people of Olanfemi Street. However, from the moment Mama Yabo's family arrived, the dogs' behavior changed drastically. They barked aggressively whenever they passed by the Umla joint, their hackles raised, their eyes filled with something that could only be described as fear. At first, Mr. Benson dismissed it as territorial behavior. After all, new people had moved in and dogs could be sensitive to change. But as days turned into weeks, the barking didn't stop. It only grew more frenzied, more desperate. It wasn't just occasional growling or protective barking. It was as if the dogs were trying to sound an alarm that no one understood. Meanwhile, the Umla joint continued to thrive. The food was still delicious and customers still lined up eagerly. But there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, something intangible yet undeniable. The once vibrant conversations at the stall grew quieter. The laughter of the family, once so inviting, became rare. And then, slowly, they stopped engaging altogether. Whispers and suspicions. It started with small things. Customers noticed that Mama Yabo and her family no longer greeted them with the same warmth. The usual pleasantries, the friendly banter, it all disappeared. They became mechanical in their service, their smiles forced, their eyes empty. Even Chidinma, who had once been a regular, started avoiding the place. Then there was the language. People began to notice that whenever the family spoke among themselves, it was in a tongue unfamiliar to anyone on Olanfemi Street. It wasn't Yoruba, Hausa, or Igbo, nor was it any dialect commonly spoken in Lagos. The words were guttural, whispered, and carried an unsettling resonance. Some joked that it sounded like an ancient tongue, something lost to time. But others weren't laughing. Baba Ari, ever the observer, paid close attention. He saw how the family's eyes no longer held warmth, how their movements seemed almost rehearsed. The once lively food stall had an eerie stillness to it, despite the continuous flow of customers. He had lived long enough to know when something was amiss. But what troubled him most was the way the dogs never stopped barking at the Umla joint. They saw something he couldn't, something beyond the veil of normal human perception. The growing fear. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed the family was involved in something sinister. Others speculated about dark rituals, about spirits that had taken human form. The more skeptical residents dismissed the paranoia, calling it baseless superstition. But even they couldn't deny the feeling of unease that had settled over the street. One night, Chidinma found herself passing by the umla joint on her way home. The street was unusually quiet, the usual sounds of Lagos nightlife eerily absent. As she hurried past, she stole a glance at the stall and froze. Mama Yabo was standing there, perfectly still, staring into the darkness. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. Her eyes, normally warm and inviting, were void of any emotion. Then, as if sensing Chidinma's presence, she slowly turned her head, locking eyes with her. Chidinma's heart pounded. For a brief moment she felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a primal fear she couldn't explain. She quickly looked away and walked faster, refusing to turn back. That night she barely slept. The next morning she told Baba Ari what she had seen. He listened intently, nodding slowly. "There is something here that does not belong," he murmured. "And those dogs, they know it." The shadows deepened. The days that followed were filled with an unshakable tension. More people started noticing the strangeness surrounding the umla joint. It wasn't just the silence of Mama Yabo's family, it was the way they moved. Their footsteps seemed too light, as if they barely touched the ground. Their shadows, when cast against the evening lights, sometimes appeared distorted, stretched unnaturally long. One evening, Baba Ari sat outside his home, observing as usual. A chill ran through him as he saw something peculiar. Mama Yabo's son, a boy of about 10, walked past a street lamp. For a split second, Baba Ari could swear that the boy's shadow moved in the opposite direction. He blinked, convinced his aging eyes were playing tricks on him. But deep down he knew better. Chidinma, now fully convinced something was terribly wrong, decided to test her suspicions. She purposely dropped a small bag of flour near the umla stall and bent down to pick it up. In that fleeting moment, she caught a glimpse of their feet beneath the table. Her breath hitched. Their feet weren't touching the ground. They hovered barely an inch above it. Her blood ran cold. The night of unrest. That night, a powerful wind swept through Olanfemi Street, rattling windows and stirring up loose debris. The air felt electric, charged with something unseen yet palpable. The dogs, Rex and Bruno, barked furiously, their voices filled with something beyond fear. It was desperation. Mr. Benson, unable to calm them down, stepped outside to see what had agitated them. His eyes darted toward the umla joint, and what he saw made his stomach churn. The entire Yabo family stood outside their stall, unmoving, their eyes fixed on something in the distance. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. It was as if they were whispering to something, or someone, unseen. A cold shiver ran down Mr. Benson's spine. He hurried back inside and locked his door. Meanwhile, in her room, Chidinma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the night was unsettling. Then, faintly, she heard it, a whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind, but as she listened closer, she realized it was something else. The whispers were rhythmic, almost melodic, like a chant in a language she did not understand. Summoning her courage, she peeked through her window. What she saw made her heart pound violently against her chest. The Yabo family was no longer at their stall. They stood in a circle in the middle of the street, swaying slightly, their heads tilted back, their arms raised. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Chidinma staggered back from the window, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Something unnatural was happening on Olanfemi Street, and she was certain of one thing: this was no ordinary family. A desperate warning. The next morning, Baba Ari called for a secret meeting. A handful of trusted residents, including Chidinma and Mr. Benson, gathered in his small living room, their faces etched with concern. "We have all seen it," Baba Ari said, his voice firm. "Something is deeply wrong with that family. They are not like us." Chidinma recounted what she had seen the night before. As she described the glowing eyes, the silent chanting, and the strange hovering feet, the others exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Benson cleared his throat. "We must do something. This presence, whatever it is changing our street. Even the animals sense it." "But what can we do?" someone asked. "We can't just accuse them without proof." Baba Ari sighed heavily. "There is one way. We must seek out someone who understands things beyond our world." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what he meant. There was only one person in Lagos who dealt with such matters: Baba Saya, an old spiritualist who lived on the outskirts of the city. The visit to Baba Saya. Later that evening, Baba Ari, Chidinma, and Mr. Benson made their way to Baba Saya's small hut. The old man was waiting for them as if he already knew they were coming. "You have seen things you should not have seen," he said, his voice low and grave. "Tell me everything." They recounted their experiences, how the dogs reacted, the unnatural movements, the whispers in the night. Baba Saya listened intently, nodding occasionally. When they finished, he closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. "The Yabo family is not human," he finally said. "At least not anymore." Chidinma's breath caught in her throat. What are they?" Baba Saya leaned forward. "They are vessels. Something else resides within them. A spirit, an ancient one. It is feeding on your street, drawing energy from the people, growing stronger." Mr. Benson swallowed hard. "How do we stop it?" Baba Saya reached for a small bundle of herbs and a vial of dark liquid. "You must cleanse the street. Burn these herbs outside their stall at midnight. Pour this liquid at your doorstep, it will protect you. But be warned, once they know you are aware, they will not be pleased." The midnight confrontation. That night, the trio prepared for the ritual. As the clock struck midnight, they gathered outside the umla joint. Baba Ari struck a match, setting the herbs ablaze. A thick, pungent smoke rose into the air. Then the air grew still, unnaturally still. A whispering sound began to fill the space around them. It was the same eerie chant Chidinma had heard the night before. And then, they appeared. The Yabo family stood in the doorway of their stall, their faces devoid of emotion, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Mama Yabo stepped forward, her mouth opening impossibly wide, a guttural sound escaping her lips. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice layered with something ancient and inhuman. The wind howled suddenly, and the fire from the herbs flickered violently. Chidinma gripped Mr. Benson's arm, terror clawing at her chest. Baba Ari held his ground. "This is our home. Whatever you are, you do not belong here." A deep growl echoed through the street, though there was no visible source. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went silent again. The Yabo family slowly stepped back into their stall, their eyes never leaving the trio. The door slammed shut behind them. The aftermath. By dawn, the umla joint was abandoned. The Yabo family had vanished, leaving no trace behind. The stall was still there, but something about it felt hollow, as if whatever presence had occupied it was truly gone. The air on Olanfemi Street felt lighter. The tension that had gripped the community for weeks seemed to lift overnight. Even the dogs, once so agitated, now lay peacefully in the sun. But Chidinma knew one thing for certain. Whatever had taken root in their neighborhood had only retreated, not disappeared. And somewhere in the unseen corners of the world, it was waiting. The lingering presence. The days that followed the disappearance of the Yabo family were eerily quiet. The once bustling umla joint stood abandoned, its wooden structure weathering under the weight of an unspoken dread. The people of Olanfemi Street tried to return to their normal lives, but the shadows of the past weeks clung to them like a persistent fog. Chidinma, Baba Ari, and Mr. Benson remained uneasy. The ritual had driven the family away, but something told them that the battle was far from over. There were nights when Chidinma would wake up to the faint sound of whispers, just as before. The difference now was that there was no one around to be whispering. One evening, Baba Ari decided to inspect the Umla stall. With Mr. Benson and Chidinma accompanying him, they cautiously approached the empty structure. The air around it felt colder than the rest of the street, and an inexplicable weight pressed down on their chests. "This place still holds something," Baba Ari muttered, his fingers grazing the edge of the wooden counter. His eyes scanned the interior, looking for anything out of place. That was when Chidinma noticed it. Etched into the wooden surface were strange symbols, ones that hadn't been there before. "What is this?" she asked, tracing the carvings with her fingers. The moment her skin made contact, a sharp pain shot up her arm. She recoiled, clutching her wrist. "It burns?" Baba Ari examined the symbols closely. "These markings, they are not natural. Someone or something left them here as a seal." Mr. Benson's face darkened. "A seal? To keep something in, or to keep something out?" A cryptic message. That night, Chidinma had a dream, one so vivid it felt real. She found herself standing in the middle of Olanfemi Street, bathed in an eerie blue light. The street was empty, save for a single figure standing at the far end. It was Mama Yabo. Her face was shrouded in shadow, but her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. When she spoke, her voice was layered, as if multiple entities were speaking through her. "You think you are safe," she whispered. "But the door is still open." Chidinma tried to speak, but no words came out. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, powerless against the force of the vision. "The seal is not complete," Mama Yabo continued. "You have not stopped it. You have only angered it." Then, without warning, Mama Yabo's face contorted, her mouth stretching wide as a shadow burst forth from her form. The darkness rushed toward Chidinma, engulfing her in its icy grasp. She woke up with a scream. The return of Baba Saya. Chidinma wasted no time in telling Baba Ari and Mr. Benson about her dream. They knew there was only one person who could make sense of it: Baba Saya. Returning to the old spiritualist's hut, they found him already waiting for them. His expression was grim. "You did not finish what you started," he said before they could even speak. Chidinma's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Baba Saya motioned for them to sit. The ritual weakened the entity, but it did not banish it. The Yabo family was merely its vessel. It has been severed from them, but it still lingers. It needs another way to return. Mr. Benson exhaled sharply. "And the seal at the stall?" Baba Saya's gaze darkened. "A warning. Someone else has tried to contain it, but the seal is incomplete. If the entity finds another host, it will return, stronger." A heavy silence filled the room. Baba Ari finally spoke. "How do we finish it?" The old man retrieved a bundle of dried leaves, a bowl of dark oil, and a small clay figure with intricate carvings. "You must perform the final sealing ritual. Burn these leaves at the stall, coat the threshold with this oil, and place this figure at the center. It will trap the entity within, preventing it from taking another form." Chidinma hesitated. "And if we fail?" Baba Saya's voice was solemn. "Then Olanfemi Street will never be the same again." The final ritual. At midnight, the trio returned to the abandoned stall. The air was thick with an unshakable presence. The wind howled, carrying with it the same whispers that had haunted Chidinma's dreams. Without hesitation, Baba Ari set the dried leaves aflame. The scent was overpowering, a mixture of burnt herbs and something ancient. Mr. Benson poured the oil carefully along the threshold, watching as the liquid shimmered unnaturally under the moonlight. Chidinma held the small clay figure, her fingers trembling. She stepped forward, placing it at the exact center of the stall. The moment it touched the ground, a deafening wail erupted around them. The very air seemed to vibrate as the shadows contorted violently. The symbols on the wooden counter began to glow, and the stall itself trembled. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic cacophony. Chidinma clutched her head as a sharp pain pierced through her skull. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The silence was deafening. The air was still once more. The glow of the symbols faded, and the oppressive weight that had hung over Olanfemi Street lifted. The presence was gone. Chidinma exhaled shakily. "It's over." Baba Ari nodded, though his face remained solemn. For now. The aftermath. In the days that followed, life on Olanfemi Street slowly returned to normal. The strange occurrences ceased, the whispers faded, and the weight that had loomed over the community disappeared. But Chidinma never forgot. Every now and then, she would pass by the abandoned stall and feel the faintest hint of something watching, something waiting. And in the deepest corners of her mind, she knew one thing for certain: evil never truly vanishes. It only sleeps. A false sense of peace. Days turned into weeks, and Olanfemi Street began to heal from the terrifying events surrounding the Yabo family. The abandoned Umla stall was left untouched, a silent reminder of the darkness that had once lurked within. The people spoke less and less about what had happened, hoping that silence would bury the past. But Chidinma could not forget. Each night, she lay awake, haunted by the whispers that had plagued her dreams. Though they had sealed the entity away, she could not shake the feeling that something still lingered in the shadows. Baba Ari shared her concerns but advised patience. "Some wounds take time to close, my dear. But if the wind shifts again, we must be ready." Meanwhile, Mr. Benson's dogs, once so aggressive toward the Yabo family, had grown calm again. It was as if they too believed that the danger had passed. But one night, just as the town had settled back into routine, the uneasy silence was shattered once more. The dogs began barking again. A dark awakening. Mr. Benson awoke to the sound of his dogs howling, their frantic cries echoing through the street. He rushed outside, only to find them all fixated on the abandoned Umla stall, growling at something unseen. Then came the whispers. They slithered through the air, carrying a language not meant for human ears. Mr. Benson felt a chill run down his spine as a sudden gust of wind swept through the street. The hairs on his arms stood on end. Chidinma and Baba Ari arrived moments later, drawn by the commotion. "It's starting again," Chidinma whispered, fear gripping her heart. Before anyone could react, a deep, guttural voice boomed from the stall. The wooden structure trembled, and the air grew thick with an oppressive force. The seal they had placed was breaking. Baba Ari's face paled. Something is trying to come through. The final battle. Desperate to prevent another disaster, the trio rushed back to Baba Sayeh's hut. The old spiritualist was already waiting for them, a grave expression on his face. The entity was never fully contained, he admitted. It was only weakened, biding its time. Now it seeks another host. Chidinma swallowed hard. Then what do we do? Baba Sayeh reached for a worn-out book, flipping through its brittle pages. There is only one way to end this permanently. We must find its true name and call it out. To name a spirit is to hold power over it. The group wasted no time, preparing for what would be their final stand against the entity. Armed with sacred herbs, protective symbols, and the old book, they made their way back to the stall. The moment they arrived, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and a deafening screech filled the air. The entity was no longer hiding, it was fully awake. Baba Saya held up the book and began chanting. The air crackled with energy as the shadows recoiled from his words. Chidinma clutched a burning bundle of sage, waving it through the air as Mr. Benson poured salt along the perimeter of the stall, reinforcing the barrier. Then the voice came again. "You cannot banish me." The darkness surged forward, slamming into the barrier, causing it to waver. Chidinma felt an invisible force wrap around her throat, choking the breath from her lungs. She struggled, her vision darkening. "Call its name," Baba Saya shouted. Through her haze, Chidinma saw the answer written on the stall itself, hidden among the cryptic symbols. With the last of her strength, she forced the name from her lips. Otund. The moment the name was spoken, the shadows convulsed violently. A blood-curdling scream filled the air as the entity's form twisted and writhed, its power unraveling. The ground cracked beneath the stall, and a final burst of dark energy erupted before everything fell silent. The presence was gone. The dawn of a new beginning. As the first light of dawn touched Olanfemi Street, the oppressive weight that had hung over it for so long finally lifted. The whispers ceased, the air felt lighter, and a deep sense of peace settled over the community. The stall, now a mere shell of its former self, was finally empty, not just physically but spiritually. The people of Olanfemi Street, though shaken, knew they had been spared from something far worse than they had ever imagined. Chidinma, Baba Ari, and Mr. Benson stood together, exhausted but victorious. "It's finally over," Chidinma whispered, allowing herself to believe it. Baba Saya nodded solemnly. "Yes. But remember, this evil never truly vanishes. It only waits for those who forget." With that, the four of them parted ways, carrying the weight of what they had endured. Olanfemi Street would move on and life would return to normal. But somewhere in the quiet corners of the night, the wind still whispered. And Chidinma, more than anyone, knew to always listen. If you were captivated by this eerie mystery, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling stories. What do you think really happened to Mama Yabo and her family? Could there still be remnants of the entity lurking somewhere? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes, the things we ignore are the things we should fear the most.